Red FM.
Well, thank you very much for coming, everybody. I know I've kept you waiting a little bit here, and for that I apologize. I never like to do that. Okay, over the past several months, we've seen a number of troubling, violent incidents in our city. In the last week alone, our homicide unit has investigated 5 deaths, 2 of which involve brazen shootings in public spaces. At this point, none of the homicide investigations appear to be connected to one another. I know that's a question that many have had. What we do know is that all of the homicides are targeted, meaning that these are acts of violence that were committed by people known to those who were harmed. And that's in no way intended to diminish the tragedy of any of these deaths. But I think at this point, with what's going on, it is important for me to reassure Calgarians that there is little or no chance that they will be targeted with the type of violence that we've seen recently if they are not connected to high-risk lifestyles or hang around those who do. Our greatest concern, however, is that an innocent bystander could be injured or killed. And in fact, we came very close to a situation like that on Boxing Day. An innocent, uninvolved person drove a vehicle past the area where a shooting had occurred, and the car was struck by stray bullets. Fortunately, nobody was injured in that attack or that incident. And last night, a home was the target of a shooting in Auburn Bay, as you know. The people who live in that home are not known to police. Our belief at this point is that this was a targeted incident that involved offenders who got the address wrong. Thankfully, no one was home at the time of the shooting and nobody was injured. In 2019, there have been more than 80 shootings in our city, a significant increase over the previous year. And although we're only 6 days into 2020, we've already had 2. This is unacceptable and it has to stop. So you may ask, and many of you have asked, why is this occurring? Unfortunately, there is no single or simple solution to address the complex issue of violence in urban settings. It's not a unique situation for our city. It's not a unique situation in our country. In our city, though, we presently have hundreds of people who are involved in a high-risk lifestyle. These individuals are not aligned to traditional organized crime or gangs in the conventional sense. The groups themselves are fluid. They move between not only different groups, but they also move around geographically, between cities not only in the province, but also across the country. As a result, these investigations are extremely complex and they're resource intensive. The one common denominator in all of this is drugs. Drugs and the profit that comes from the distribution of them fuels this greed and violence. Conflicts between individuals over perceived slights, distribution territory, and other interpersonal grievances are all triggers for the types of gun violence that we've seen. But what ties them all together are criminal networks seeking to profit illegitimately through the drug trade. In addition to current conflict between 3 main and what I would say are more organized groups in our city, it's also important to recognize that this has just been a generally demanding environment the last couple of years. Intoxication by both alcohol and drugs has driven a lot of violence in communities and among groups of individuals that actually has nothing to do with the distribution of drugs or the drug trade or really high-risk lifestyles. More of it is around addiction and social issues like that. And Detective Schiavetta is going to talk about a couple of those situations here shortly. Simply put, right now, there's a lot of violence going on in our communities, or in communities, including ours. And so what are we doing about that? As you know, we have been fully engaged in this, and I've seen a number of you who I know around the room, and we've talked at length about this over the last number of months. We continue, though, to be fully engaged in this very serious issue. Let me assure you that this is the number 1 priority externally for our service. We have numerous resources dedicated to tackling this issue, not just from the investigative perspective, but also working tirelessly on suppression efforts. To enhance this work, we've developed both short and long-term strategies, and I've recently created an inspector position. It's a senior officer position, and that person's responsibility is to actually oversee the work of various different specialty units around the organization, around this particular issue. Our strategy, I think I referred, in the latter part of 2019 COVID-19 to the fact that we would be re-upping our strategy around gun violence. That strategy, though not fully finalized just yet, will have 4 priority streams, I can tell you that. We will be predicting, preventing, protecting, and pursuing. The work is underway in each of those areas, and we'll have more for you on that in the coming weeks. But certainly as Chief, I'm committed to utilizing all of the resources at our disposal to do our very best to get ahead of this violence and hold the individuals that are doing this kind of thing accountable. We currently have hundreds of officers working on this, from specialty units to patrol officers, investigators, analysts, crime scene techs, forensic firearms specialists. Everybody is engaged. Everybody is working hard together to solve these cases, as well as to prevent the crime that hasn't happened yet. In addition to the various pressures that we can exert as the police, we definitely need the assistance of the community in dealing with this problem. This is not uniformly a policing problem. We know there are people who know what's going on inside of these groups. We know there are people who know that their loved ones are involved in high-risk activities. Even the average Calgarian who may think they saw something, picked up a license plate or saw something suspicious in the neighborhood, we really need that information. Sometimes what may seem like a very small and insignificant piece of information may be one more piece in a puzzle that actually helps to shape a picture of what's gone on in these type of incidents. So it can never be underestimated, the importance of that. So I urge certainly Calgarians in all parts of the city, when you see things that you're uncomfortable with or that you're concerned about, to let us know. On that same point, I'd like to thank the community of Saddle Ridge for their assistance in the most recent shooting. This is obviously a community where people are dedicated and committed to keeping their community safe. They have made a huge difference in this most recent investigation, and they've obviously, as I say, been very committed to supporting the police and making sure that their community stays safe. So I want to thank them for that. As I've said before, these cases are extremely resource intensive, and they do impact the service that we can provide to citizens on other matters, including property crimes. You would have seen a number of social media notifications go out on the weekend there where we advised, the average Calgarian who had calls into the police that we may be a little bit delayed in getting to some of those calls. And as you can appreciate, if we have a forensic team that's required at a break and enter and also required at the shooting scene or a homicide scene, we're going to firstly have to send them to the violent crime scene. And so that certainly has had an impact on Calgarians generally. And we just want to let them know this is just simply a matter of prioritization. When we get spikes in crimes like shootings like we have in the last week, our specialist capabilities that are in places like forensics doesn't grow. It's the very same. So once again, there has been impact certainly on Calgarians. We understand that, and we want to make sure that they understand what we've been doing and how we're managing that response. In summary, I would say we've had a disappointing start to 2020 in Calgary in terms of violent crime. This is violence that will not be tolerated in our city. We, and by we, I mean everybody in the Calgary Police Service, but also our community, need to take it seriously and personally. Together, we will put a stop to it. Calgary remains, it's important to note, Calgary remains a very safe and vibrant community. We are seeing a disturbing trend in terms of an increase in violent crime. But this is something that we have seen before, we've managed it before, and I think it's a message to Calgarians to know that Calgary does remain absolutely a safe and vibrant city. I would also like to make mention of thanks to members of the police service who have worked tirelessly over the holidays and these last number of days. We've been stretched fairly thin with these number of serious major crimes in very short order. And as I say, people have had to pick up the slack, but the work and the cooperation that has occurred has been excellent. Certainly Detective Schiavetta is going to talk again about a couple of investigations where we are at a very good place in a very short period of time, and that's because of the excellent work that's been done in the days following these sorts of things. So it does have an impact, certainly internally and externally, but I think we've seen some value notwithstanding the challenges that we faced. So in addition to thanking the members of our police service, I also want to thank the community for their support. As I say, Saddle Ridge has been an excellent example of that, where we could not have gotten where we are without the community's support and assistance, and we just want to emphasize how vital that is going to be to us as we move forward. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Detective Schiavetta of our Homicide Unit, and he will answer questions and talk to you about some specific incidents we've been following over the past few days. Thank you.
Hello everyone. I will provide a brief rundown of our recent homicide investigations, and then I'll be able to answer what questions I can after. I'll start with the most recent and work my way backwards. On January 5th, this is updated in relation to the undetermined death in Fish Creek Park. The investigation into a body discovered engulfed in flames in Fish Creek Park on Sunday remains classified as an undetermined death investigation. Our autopsy is scheduled for Wednesday, January 8th, to determine cause and manner of death, as well as the identity of the victim. Despite the state the body was found in, it is still not yet known if the death is criminal in nature or the result of a suicide. Police do not have yet a preliminary identification of the victim, and it does not match any missing person reports. The victim is believed to be a Caucasian man, over 6 feet tall. Police are encouraging anyone who may be missing a loved one to file a missing persons report if they have not done so. On January 5th, the investigation downtown into an assault. The autopsy for a man found downtown in medical distress on Sunday, January 5th, 2020, is scheduled for Tuesday, January 7th. Investigators are currently reviewing CCTV to assist in determining how many offenders were involved in the assault. It is believed the assault occurred at approximately 4:45 a.m. in the 100 block of 11th Avenue Southeast. Anyone who is in that area at the time or may have information about this incident is asked to contact police. On January 4th, we're investigating a shooting which occurred in the community of Saddle Ridge. As per the release issued last night, police continue to seek witnesses who are believed to have been in the area at the time of the shooting. An autopsy to formally identify the deceased is scheduled for tomorrow, Tuesday, January 7th. Further updates are not expected to be available until after autopsy. On January 1st, we have a New Year's Day homicide investigation. The Homicide Unit is investigating a homicide that occurred over New Year's. On Thursday, January 2nd, police are alerted by the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner that a routine autopsy into the death of an individual on January 1st was deemed a homicide. The autopsy revealed the man had died as a result of an assault, and those injuries were consistent with that. A subsequent investigation has revealed the man was in an altercation at the Alpha House, located at 203 15th Avenue Southeast at approximately 6:50 p.m. on Tuesday, December 31st. Staff at the Alpha House called police to report the assault and canceled the call shortly after at the request of the victim, believing the man was all right. The next morning at approximately 6 a.m., Alpha House staff found the victim in medical distress and contacted emergency medical services. He was taken to hospital, but later succumbed to his injuries. In this investigation, we have identified a person of interest, and the investigation is going. This is classified as Calgary's first homicide in 2020. On December 30th, we're investigating a shooting which occurred in the community of Rundle. The investigation continues into a shooting that left one man dead and another seriously injured in Rundle early last week. We are still seeking information about the driver of a white 2018 Ford Fusion, who is believed to have critical information about the investigation. On December 27th, we had a non-culpable homicide. The death of a man on December 27th has been deemed a non-culpable homicide. At approximately 9:30 p.m. on Friday, December 27th, police received a call from an upstairs tenant of a fourplex in the 2500 block of 9th Avenue Southeast after she heard a disturbance between two downstairs occupants. When officers arrived on scene, they found a 48-year-old man deceased and a 39-year-old man was taken into custody. An autopsy occurred on December 30th to formally identify the victim and determine the cause of the death. The man's death was ruled as a homicide by the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. The investigation by the Calgary Police Service Homicide Unit, in consultation with the Crown Prosecutor, has determined that this is a non-culpable homicide, and as such, charges will not be laid, and as a result, the deceased will not be identified. A non-culpable homicide includes situations where the homicide occurs as a result of an accident or in self-defense. Although a person died at the hands of another, the likelihood of conviction does not stand the test of a criminal trial, and therefore charges are not laid. Investigators believe the two men were acquaintances at a gathering within a residence when the deceased allegedly assaulted the 39-year-old man. The 48-year-old man received fatal injuries as a result of the confrontation. And finally, in relation to the Boxing Day homicide, a person of interest sought in the Boxing Day homicide of Farah Percy Handuli has been located. On Friday, January 3rd, we released a plea for information to locate Mohammed Hussein Ahmed, wanted for an impression warrant. Ahmed was located on Saturday, January 4th in Ontario. We continue to search for a newer model white Dodge Durango believed to be in connection to this investigation. And photos of this vehicle are available on the Calgary newsroom website. We would like to thank the media and the public for their assistance in locating Ahmed. The investigation continues. Anyone with information about these investigations is asked to contact Calgary Police Service through the non-emergency number or Crime Stoppers. So I can certainly answer any questions in relation to the investigation. And if you have any further questions for the chief as well.
With the Boxing Day incident, I think you were saying that there was an incident where a pedestrian might have been struck. I was just wondering, how much concern should the public have with all these incidents and possibly being involved like that one person was?
Sure, I think I'll start off by saying we have a small number of individuals, like the chief has spoken about, who are involved in high-risk lifestyle. Unfortunately, being in a high-risk lifestyle, these people are carrying weapons. And anytime, obviously, a firearms charge in public, anyone is at risk. And in this case, certainly on Boxing Day, it's very busy. It's on one of the busiest roads in Calgary. We're very fortunate that an innocent bystander was not killed.
I was just going to say, how, to your question, how concerned should the public be? I think they should be quite concerned. I mean, the potential for what could happen is very grave. But the likelihood of the number of vehicles removing from the city and that sort of thing, the likelihood that it will happen is probably low. The impact, if it were to happen, is very, very high. So I think we need to keep it in that perspective. Certainly, it's a big concern, but the likelihood of that happening is statistically quite low.
And just on the resources, I know that you said a couple times that, these are resource-extensive incidents and all that. I was just wondering, just the beginning of this year, is it concerning that you are having to stretch these resources already into 2020?
Yeah, I think so. We manage the stats there on how we're doing sort of year-to-date compared to the last year. If we look at everything that goes into this, the costs of this, the costs are very high. The human costs of doing this, when you've got people that are out working that much, are very high. The relationship costs for people are very high. The costs in the community from fear and people's concern about whether or not they're safe. If you could monetize that, that's very high. I just think we've had a large spate of incidents that have happened as Staff Sergeant Schiavetta, and I'm sorry, I think I gave him a demotion here before a couple of times, but as Staff Sergeant Schiavetta has referred to, the big thing that we want to get across today is that yes, we do have gang violence and gun violence going on in the city. Everybody knows about that. But I think we've had a spate of incidents happen here in the last 5 or so days where they're not connected. If these things were all connected and they were going on, I think we're very concerned now, but we're concerned about them in isolation in their own streams. If they were all connected to one another and this was all retaliation, I think we would probably be quite a bit more concerned than we are now about some risks that were referred to previously. So certainly, I think this is a reassurance message for Calgarians to say that if you're listening to the news and you're hearing these things, there's a lot to be concerned about, but it's important for us to come out and say, this is where we are currently with these things. They're not all connected. Some of them are completely standalone, and we're in a good place in relation to these investigations. Thanks to the good work done by some of these folks. So.
With regards to capacity, is there an allocation of resources that are moving from one part of the city to the other? And what lessons have you learned from this? You said it happened before, you dealt with it. What are some lessons that you learned from that time?
Yeah, I think it's changed a little bit from the last time. It's a very good question. I mentioned that right now things seem to be much more fluid than they were in the past. The time in the past, 2015, would have been before my time, but around some of the more distinguishable gangs, the gangs and that sort of thing that we had. Again, they were more distinguishable and they were more traditional in the sense that it would be like the Hells Angels, where you could tell who belonged with who. And these days, I think one of the biggest challenges isn't like that right now. We've got groups of people that are very fluid. And again, I think as Martin said, we have a personal interest in relation to a particular investigation, and we put out a plea and we find him in Ontario. We get a young man murdered on Home Road, who's from Ontario, who had just come from BC, and was murdered in the streets of Calgary. And so the folks that he is connected to are not from here. So you can imagine the difficulty that presents itself in terms of the investigation. And we're talking about some investigations that actually may not live here in Calgary. So we're the agency of jurisdiction in relation to that, but we will have to actually reach out and make contacts with our partners in these other areas where these folks are from in order to start to piece this together. So it's not as easy as it would be if it were simply a community.
And with allocation of the resources within the different parts of the city, has that moved around?
Yeah, at this point, not yet. We haven't had to do that just yet. We have seen, I would say that we've had in 2019, the vast majority of the shooting incidents we saw were focused in the Northeast. However, as you saw, it isn't unique to that, it's in other areas too. So, so far we've been able to manage what we've had to manage, but certainly if it comes to a point where we feel we need to move resources, we'll do that.
I have a question for the staff sergeant, if that's okay. The victim that's connected to the Alpha House, can you just clarify, was he a client at the time that he was found deceased?
So the fatal assault occurred just outside of Alpha House. And he went inside. So yes, he was a client. And he went into medical distress while staying in Alpha House and was transferred to hospital due to conscious injuries.
In terms of the investigation in Saddle Ridge, like, have you recovered weapons, or like what played out in that community? And I know that you mentioned the residents directly being so engaged. So what are the dynamics of that case?
So obviously we're still early in our investigation, but what I can tell you is that we located two vehicles in the alley. We believe that there are obviously other people involved that we have not spoken to. Our officers are combing the community looking for any evidence that may have been discarded, as well as reviewing CCTV. And just to reiterate what our chief mentioned, the community is obviously very concerned of the violence. We have received fantastic cooperation, and with the help of the CCTV, we're starting to put the pieces of that puzzle together. And it certainly was targeted, but that doesn't discount the fact that we had firearms charged in a public place that was heavily populated.
So have any arrests also been made in this case?
Sorry?
Particularly for this Selridge case, have any arrests been made?
In Selridge, we have not made any arrests at this time, but I can tell you we are working very hard and the investigation is progressing.
For Selridge last year, there was a shooting just a couple of doors down on that same area. Is that connected?
We do not believe that's connected. And at this time, we do not believe the events that I just spoke about are connected to each other.
You just spoke about how these groups are fluid, and you mentioned that the victim and the suspect from the Boxing Day investigation, I believe, from Ontario via BC. Are any of these other investigations or homicides believed to have involved suspects or victims who are from outside of Calgary?
Right now, the most challenging investigation as far as resource allocation and complexity is certainly Boxing Day. We have a victim as well as suspects, persons of interest who do not reside in our province. So we're relying heavily on other police agencies to provide assistance. And right now, we are working directly with Toronto Police Service, and we actually had investigators working in Toronto with TPS.
But any of the other investigations that have happened since then, or any other suspicious deaths that have happened since then, are any of those believed to be?
The other ones I would classify as local.
Any other questions for the chief or the staff sergeant?
For the chief, is this normal, this spike in violence this time of year?
No, I wouldn't want to say it's normal. Like I say, it's really disconcerting, really. We'd like to think there would be peace on earth this time of year, but this is not what we're experiencing. And like I say, we know Calgarians are concerned. We share their concern, and like I say, we work together with the communities and again, we engage well with the communities to make sure we can move this forward.